This is Pokemon's best legendary duo, and by the end of this Artopsy, you will see that these mascot legendaries not only establish the legendary dichotomy trope that Groudon and Kyogre are most well known for.
I don't like sand. It's coarse and rough and irritating, and it gets everywhere.
You can't bring your water bottle in here!
But also did it better than every iteration since. And this includes yin and yang symbolism as well. Yes, an actual deep and nuanced yin yang duo that isn't by a 12-year-old DeviantArt edgelord. Yeah. Anyway, it all began when I saw this video in particular and thought, yeah, what the fuck do the legendary birds and beasts even represent? Well, to answer this, I need a reliable and readily available source of all things Pokemon. And so I went to the online encyclopedia that Pokemon professors are always threatening us not to use, Bulbapedia. While there, I spent days looking up both trios and their individual members, and upon doing so I found that not only had the games already given the Beast Trio an explicit and eloquent meaning, but my girlfriend had also left me. Stupid bitch. Anyway, my summary Artopsy on the Beast Trio shows that even if they are nowhere close to being in the top 5 legendary groups in terms of power, they easily make the top 5 of greatest legendary groups when it comes to meaning, and in serving to hide and substantiate their own trio master's meaning as well. And this is because they and their master are like Pokemon's 4 horsemen in representing the cycle of rebirth, that being the instigating disaster of tragedy, the utter annihilation of what once was to ashes, and then the purifying resolution that provides an end to the remaining flames and the genesis to what remains in the ashes. Told you they were a very eloquent metaphor. However, let's get on to the less eloquent trio with the bird trio. Professor Oak in the anime gave a very loose interpretation as to what they represent, but aside from this, there's nothing explicitly stated anywhere else, including canonically in the games, which is exactly what prompted this YouTuber's very funny animation and the general discussion around the trio. But can I somehow connect them to their trio master Lugia in a way that's just as great as the connection between Hoenn and the 3 beasts? Well, actually, yes. I was in fact able to do so after doing this Artopsy on Lugia. So stay tuned till the end and I will show you the true meaning of the bird trio you and many other Pokefans have always been wanting to know. But getting back on track, it was as I thought about the meaning of the beasts and the fact that the birds only have loose interpretations as to whatever they are, that I had the even more interesting thought of 2 Pokemon in much the same boat as the 3 birds. That's right, the respective trio masters. So let me ask the question then. The fuck does a gay chicken and a fat finger mutant porpoise even represent? Well, I had a heck of a time answering that question because as far as I could tell from Bulbapedia, there isn't as much of an upfront and satisfactory answer given for them as opposed to, well, almost all following legendaries. I mean, it's implicitly and explicitly yelled at you throughout the Pokemon franchise that the duality of land versus sea is embodied by Groudon and Kyogre, and that the duality of life versus destruction is embodied by some deer who got its antlers caught in Christmas lights, and Bacon Burb, destroyer of arteries. However, for Lugia and Ho-Oh, there are only the infrequently mentioned loose interpretations of the duo as Sea and Sky Guardians that lack sufficient, consistent, and substantiating characterization. And even if these titles were explicitly represented and portrayed throughout the story as it is with other legendaries, that is just so unsatisfying an answer when you have Kyogre and Rayquaza introduced literally 1 generation later as the very godlike personifications and masters of the sea and sky. Not just that, but Rayquaza itself has actual characterization to merit the title of a Sky Guardian, as it defends the world by stopping Kyogre and Groudon from fully monopolizing control over the sky.
It's time to stop!
Thus simultaneously neutralizing 2 world-ending climate crises. In addition, Rayquaza destroys world-ending meteors that imperil the entire world and consumes them, thus acting as an absolutely brilliant living metaphor of the atmosphere and how it protects the planet. That's not just a badass, but an actual portrayal of a Sky Guardian right there, whose connection to the sky is unequivocally defined. Like, what the hell does a gay chicken do to guard the sky? Fly around endlessly shooting out rainbows? And sure, Kyogre seeks to increase its biosphere in a way that is not positive, but this acts as a necessary counterbalance to guarding the oceans from the desire of Groudon to dissipate the sea and thus encroach on and destroy the habitat of all sea Pokemon therein. It's an intriguing guardianship in its complexity as an ambiguous good and in opposition to Rayquaza's natural and benevolent authority. Meanwhile, the authority of Kyogre and Groudon is similar to a king primarily seeking to imperialistically increase his power and sphere of influence, but naturally maintaining his kingly duties that keeps the needs of his subjects met to a degree. Now, where does Lugia come along in that equation? Oh yeah, that's right. It isn't even a fucking water type. And this is why the legendary duo's roles are just loose interpretations. They lack the consistent portrayal, grand feats, and general characterization of stewardship over these grand biospheres to merit them in a way which is very vaguely familiar of another duo. Furthermore, the Hoenn legends come along and invalidate these purported roles with their godly personifications, control, and representation of these roles. This is incredibly detrimental to the characterization of Hoenn and Lugia, as it insinuates that our Johto boys are playing second fiddle to these two sea and sky gods, and not standing for much on their own. And this seriously diminishes the idea that our Johto boys are these godly mascot legendary trio masters of their own, that are sovereign in all senses of the word, and thus warrant nothing but unwavering awe and reverence. Seriously, if I asked the average passive consumer of Pokemon media what two Pokemon represent and control the seas and skies, a 1080p image of Kyogre and Rayquaza would instantly appear in their minds. If I asked them what the Johto duo represented, you'd possibly hear them bring up themes of the Phoenix, reincarnation, purity, storms, sea dragons, destruction, and yin and yang. This is because these bland and loose titles they hold are also nowhere near as interesting to us as the other unique and meaningful characteristics of the two. I know for a fact the lasting impression of Ho-Oh on the stinky booger eating 10-year-old you and me was the mystical implication of granting eternal happiness to Ash when he saw Ho in the very first episode of Pokemon, and the mystical reincarnation event of the Beast Trio that is to this day one of Pokemon's most fascinating enigmas. But the inconsistent and lackluster roles for these two legendaries goes even further. Legendary screenwriter and creator of Lugia, Takeshi Shudo, made Lugia to represent a maternal ocean deity that is a personification of the ocean and controls the ocean currents in much the same manner Kyogre would later be appointed to. Well, except for the maternal part. However, this runs counter to Game Freak's later portrayal of Lugia in the games, such as them not making Lugia a water type, which would have given it an unequivocal association with the sea, them making it a psychic type to give it a stronger impression as opposed to a maternal one, and them making Lugia genderless. So you can see these inconsistencies further illustrate that there is a lot of conflicting self-identity, unsatisfying elemental symbolism, and general disregard given towards the duo. It really seems like they were not made expressly to represent the dichotomy they are said to embody, but instead had that applied to them as an afterthought, especially with how Lugia was just lifted from the movies to be Ho-Oh's counterpart and changed a little. So with that all said, why am I even bothering with these two legendaries when Pokemon has such a large and varied pool of legendaries, all with more consistent and fascinating lore? Well, could it be that maybe everything I have said until now is just how it seems on the surface? Well, times two, that is the very question we'll be getting to the bottom of in this Artopsy. See if this is a case of Game Freak truly showing and not telling, and that there is much more than meets the eye with these two legendaries. So I dissected the canon game data and all symbolic and archetypal meaning of both legendaries, with the hopes of bringing you all the definitive Artopsy and exposing the special deeper meaning behind the legendary duo. Essentially a way to square the seemingly inconsistent meaning and symbolism laden throughout their stories, with the chief focus of this Artopsy being to expose what is particularly special about these two among the whole Pokemon pantheon of legendaries. And during this Artopsy, I was pleasantly surprised with discovering that both Ho-Oh and Lugia, from their very characteristics described in the games to the two very specific natural phenomena they were chosen to be the living personifications of, have the greatest meaning of all legendaries. Bold claim when I made it sound like they were nothing but Pokemon defined by loose interpretations, right? Well, those loose interpretations are just that, loose. They fail to define or connote the true beauty of this duo's deeper meaning, which is why the interpretations are horribly criminal and really should be retired. That is, unless you think past first impressions and don't look at what the words sea and sky denote, as doing so would have you believe them to be literal guardians and personifications of the sea and sky like Kyogre and Rayquaza. Instead, you must think of the sea and sky metaphorically and look at the traditional metaphorical meaning connoted across all of storytelling by these two vast and beautiful expanses they inhabit. You then will see the reality that these two are associated with and dwell within the sea and sky just as a symbolic reinforcement of said profound and dichotomous metaphorical qualities. Now, this is in no way an unfounded postulation whatsoever, but quite the opposite, as using the metaphorical meaning of natural elements and the expanses such as the sea and sky has always been a method for ascribing meaning since time immemorial. Ever wonder why gods and angels are always sitting in the clouds? Well, I'm so glad I asked, because the best example of this method is how the sky is used as the realm for practically every god ever to ascribe a sense of heavenly divinity and transcendence. And another favorite example of mine is the Leviathan, an embodiment of the ever-present threat of absolute chaos looming over us all. It inhabits the deepest abyssal waters that represent not just chaos, but the very primeval, chaotic ocean waters that were contemporaneous to the time of creation. And these two analogies show us exactly what is being done with the godly beasts of Hoenn and Lugia. Hoenn is forever in the sky to unequivocally connote a sacred divinity, and Lugia, in contrast, is forever in the depths of the ocean to unequivocally connote a Leviathan-like chaos. And when you take these two connotations into account, the titles would now read something like Sacred Guardian for Hoenn and Chaos Guardian for Lugia. Pretty big mindfuck, huh? I guess I should have taken you all out to dinner first, but you were all looking thicker than a Gen 3 for alligator, so I just couldn't resist. But butts aside, this first revelation was a good indicator to me of what was to come when dissecting this duo. There's going to be so much turning on its head in this Artopsy that you won't be able to tell this video apart from an 80s hip-hop music video. And that isn't by my design, but Game Freak's own propensity for imbuing meaning to their franchise's creatures with two techniques that were done exceptionally well with this duo. So what are these two techniques that Game Freak used to make this duo so damn good? Well, first off, you have the implicit conveyance of meaning through imagery, archetypes, symbolism, and motifs, which is in contrast to how everything is mostly literal and explicit for every regional legendary after. Essentially, the Gold and Silver games and the legendary duo itself prodigiously use metaphors and the literary technique of show, don't tell, to express meaning in a much more engaging and profound manner, and also in a way that is quite impressive for a Pokemon game. And the second technique that makes them so good would be the intricate use of allusions to old as dirt traditional symbols, motifs, and metaphors that are so rich with meaning, which happen to also synergize so well for this duo in their region that are both based on very traditional Japanese motifs and elements. Likewise, this is a much more engaging and profound technique of expression than, say, just making a blatant reference which is readily understood in a second. That's the difference between people deconstructing your works for years after your wormy golden corral and your stories going to the grave before you do. You can't just say things and expect people to flock to your story and characters. You have to show us that Griffith is an allusion to the Antichrist archetype and is representative of an idealistic ideologue not in control of his own psychological shadow, rather than just saying out loud every other page. Oh wait, wrong franchise. Anyway, since this is a legendarily long subject to do a deep dive on, let's cut the intro there and get diving like the diving Pokemon, Lugia. So where to begin? Well, I believe the Heartburn and Soul Calibur remake monikers are exceptional characterizations by Game Freak to start off, primarily characterizing Johto's legendary duo in a way that is uniquely symbolic to them and consistent with their original characterizations as metaphorical sea and sky guardians. But just why are those monikers so useful in describing them? Well, my Artopsy findings show that Hoenn and Lugia represent the dichotomous states of mind and soul, which we like to succinctly characterize as heart and soul, or yin and yang. And what these old as dirt traditional concepts are describing is humanity's idealistic ego of masculine sacred order and the subversive shadow of feminine impassioned chaos. Just think Guts and Griffith from Berserk, and you've got a good understanding of the dichotomy already. And as you might have noticed, this dichotomy of yin and yang, or ideal versus shadow, falls exactly in line with the exact same things the sea and sky traditionally represent across storytelling.
Oh yeah, it's all coming together.
Hold on till the end, Kronk, because it's gonna keep getting better and better. But I guess Lugia is still representative of femininity and a deep representation of the sea like Shudo desired. And this Artopsy is actually already satisfying both sides, which I was not expecting at all. Delightful. Now, for brevity's sake, I'll be calling these two qualities the ideal and the shadow from here on, but you're welcome to think yin and yang in your head if it's more convenient. And don't worry if you don't understand this conclusion right now. This is just the beginning of the Artopsy after all. So allow me to show you how I arrived at this conclusion through both Pokemon's canon info and portrayals, and you'll definitely get it by the end. Also, I guess a little cocaine was evolved. With that aside, first on the Artopsy table we have Ho-Oh, the rainbow Pokemon. Ho-Oh is a dual fire flying type Pokemon endemic to the skies of Johto. This legend comes in at a height of 12 foot 6 inches, or 3.8 meters, and tips the scales at a whopping 438.7 pounds, or 199 kilograms. Safe to say it's not a bird Pokemon you'll have sitting on your shoulders and nicknaming Polly anytime soon. Relationship wise, our chunky chicken Ho-Oh forms a legendary duo with Lugia and is a trio master of the legendary beasts. And as is common for most legendaries, Ho-Oh is genderless, lacks an egg group, and cannot be bred, because gay chickens cannot lay eggs apparently. Finally, to get a glimpse of its ethology, its two original Pokédex entries read, "Legends claim this Pokemon flies the world's skies continuously on its magnificent 7-colored wings. A legend says that its body glows in 7 colors. A rainbow is said to form behind it when it flies." Thank you, Budget Fiver David Attenborough. Remind me to never hire you again. Sounds a lot more like Jeremy Wade anyway. That aside, that's quite a lot of rainbow talk up to this point, and that's very important, as I will bring up in a moment. But what's important to briefly mention is Ho-Oh's ethology of flying endlessly stems from one of 3 fiery birds of myth, which Ho-Oh alludes to, and that is the fiery Huma bird of Persian mythology, which is reborn from fire in phoenix-like fashion and lives its entire life flying high above the earth without ever alighting upon it. And before I forget to mention it, the other firebird Ho-Oh alludes to is obviously the phoenix, which likewise doubly strengthens Ho-Oh's theme of rebirth. Okay, so now what information could we gather from its Artopsy? Well, as the ideal, Ho-Oh represents order, temperance, hope, promise, auspiciousness, blessings, sanctity, rebirth, and outright virtue and creativity of the mind and its implementation. This core nature is symbolized through its creation of and identification with rainbows, and its association with purity and sanctity across Pokemon media. This nature is also exhibited through its sacred and mystical powers, such as its miracle of reincarnating the Beast Trio, and its auspicious blessing upon being seen, which causes children to age slower than time flows in the hyperbolic time chamber. Eternal happiness. And the cool thing about the Huma is that it's also the source of another one of Ho-Oh's mythical qualities, that being the very blessing of eternal happiness. Wait, speaking of Huma, I think I forgot something. Remember how I said Ho-Oh has a connection to 3 fiery birds of myth? Yes, I must be stupid or something, because I forgot to mention the fiery bird Ho-Oh is chiefly based off of in the first place, the majestic Feng Wang, or Ho-Oh in Japanese. And it is this very illusion that is most essential to establishing everything I've said until now, from its fire typing, to its nature as the outright virtuous ideal, to the connection with the yin and yang concept, to, well, very own freaking name. Actually, let's hold it there. What I should have said is it's the most essential motif alongside rainbows, as it's this beauteous bird's direct identification with rainbows of all natural phenomena that's the very key to evincing its entire nature and dichotomy with Lugia. You see, rainbows are a common traditional symbol of hope and promise in that they directly follow disastrous storms and vividly take the place of the dark and dreary storm clouds in the sky. You're probably familiar with the symbolism through its most notable representation within the Bible. Well, as the Bible illustrates, the very manifestation of rainbows in the sky holds such profound metaphorical value because they promise no more stormy days ahead, and the time following their appearance is usually a period when order is regained, constructs are rebuilt, crops and other industries are revitalized, etc., etc. They are lights at the end of a dark and stormy tunnel where everything is reborn, thus simultaneously reinforcing Ho-Oh's phoenix-like theme of rebirth as well. Apparently phoenixes were beautiful and awe-inducing enough to everyone but Game Freak, so they gave us a rainbow phoenix. Frickin' dope. This rainbow motif also brilliantly conveys an interconnection to Lugia by playing off its storm motif, which will be expounded upon later. But let's take a second and give early Game Freak their props. Game Freak is not at the same caliber of expression as early Silent Hill or From Software games, or Japanese writers like Kentaro Miura, but they have always displayed a proficiency in symbolism and allusions to traditional motifs, so as to naturally and subtly imbue significant meaning to the creatures of the world we interact with. That said, all these highly auspicious and virtuous values Ho-Oh embodies are enshrined in a monumental tower both in broad daylight and in full view of the people, with the tower notably being extremely revered and venerated across the region. And so this described monumentalizing and piety connotes both Ho-Oh's embodied virtues and nature as ones that are prized and celebrated openly, and also Ho-Oh's nature to be a conscious side of the mind, with Ho-Oh flying across the sky being evident of such. And these things are further accentuated by the specific tower built for it. It's not just any plain old blocky tower, but a pagoda, and pagodas represent the path to heightened awareness and perception, and are auspicious symbols of wisdom, peace, and harmony. So keep this all in mind every time I talk about the implications of consciousness, reverence, harmony, and other values towers hold both to Ho-Oh and Lugia, because it's not all coming out of my ass. Okay, that's Ho-Oh done. So let's wipe down our Artopsy table, because up next on the Artopsy table we got Lugia. Now Lugia is a whole different beast, but before we get to that, let's start with dissecting the physical specimen. Lugia is the diving Pokemon, a dual psychic flying type Pokemon endemic to the Whirl Island and abyssal trenches of Pokemon. It comes in at a height of 17'1" or 5.2 meters, which is crazy. I believe this tall boy was the one who put the tower in Tower Duo. And for all its height, it surprisingly only weighs 40 pounds heavier than Ho-Oh at 476.2 pounds or 216 kilograms. Guess we know which one of the duo watches their weight. Hint hint, not Fat Gay Chicken. Now relation-wise, Lugia is the legendary duo counterpart of Ho-Oh and the trio master of the legendary birds. Lugia, like most legendaries, is also genderless, lacks an egg group, and cannot be bred. Finally, to get an important glimpse of its ethology, its 2 original Pokédex entries read, "It is said that it quietly spends its time deep at the bottom of the sea because its powers are too strong. It is said to be the guardian of the seas. It is rumored to have been seen on the night of a storm." With his draconic appearance and devisement by Shudo and Game Freak as a thalassic entity that controls currents and storms, it shares in the ethology of the Japanese ocean tutelary deity Ryujin. Ryujin is the Shinto dragon god who controls the tides of the ocean and also storms. Now, one illusion that is important to note is that their real-life mythological counterparts, the Fang Guang off which Ho-Oh is based, and the East Asian dragon which Lugia shares its draconic design and characteristics with, are representative of the Chinese yin-yang duality when paired. I'm telling you, the yin-yang Artopsy is only intensifying. Resistance is futile. Submit. Okay, now what information could we gather from its Artopsy? Well, as a shadow, Lugia represents chaos, intemperance, despair, uncertainty, inauspiciousness, retribution, irreverence, destruction, and outright senselessness and destructiveness of the mind and its implementation. It being consigned to an abyss at the bottom of the ocean connotes our winged Gojira's nature as a mostly latent and subconscious side of the mind that resurfaces cyclically to cause chaos as an analog to divine retribution and all that symbolizes. You know, karma, comeuppance, consequences, etc., etc. That and the very fact that it involuntarily whips up storms is the best illustration of the chaos and intemperance of its nature you could ask for. Well, it would be if it weren't for the true pure stroke of genius of Lugia that is coupling the Leviathan motif with the motif of storms. This combination just as brilliantly conveys the theme of chaos as Ho-Oh's Phoenix archetype being combined with rainbows does the theme of rebirth. And just saying Storm Leviathan sounds really fucking cool. So mad props to early Game Freak. And also like that of Ho-Oh and rainbows, Lugia's nature is symbolized in its creation of and identification with powerful storms. This connection comprises the vast majority of its Pokédex entries and lore, like that of Ho-Oh and Rainbows, wherein you can see Game Freak further characterizing and chiefly identifying Lugia with storms. I like this decision of Lugia embodying storms and chaos just as much as the heart and soul dichotomy Game Freak recognized, as it serves to truly distinguish Lugia from Kyogre so that it can come into its own and have its relevance in the Pokemon world as a separate and distinct embodiment of the natural world. Now, as opposed to Ho-Oh's ideal nature being representative of the divine blessing sides of divinity, Lugia represents the also necessary and badass divine retribution side of divinity. There are 2 things which beautifully evoke such a meaning. First is Lugia being a parallel to Godzilla and other Leviathan archetypal figures that represent the chaotic subconscious side of our human nature and tragedies thereof, resurfacing as a consequence to all of our faults, inability to healthily subsume our shadows, and our endless evils. And secondly, we have Lugia's very own actions of such. This is featured most prominently in its really cool lore of tearing a frickin' island into many pieces and forming an archipelago as retribution to man engaging in the evil of warfare over that island. And the excerpt ends by saying what? Direct consequences and retribution for man's nature being at odds with the harmony of nature. Something that will be expounded on a bit more in the second section of this video. But what is important to note now is that this event is a parallel that plays off Ho-Oh's own miraculous reincarnation event and eternal happiness, and is just as significant for that reason. And speaking of divine retribution, one other very important thing to note is that his storms can last as long as the very flood of Genesis. Yeah, remember the traditional symbolism of rainbows I mentioned before? This slight nod to the Bible is no coincidence. Game Freak lore and motifs prodigiously allude to real-life religions, folklore, and mythologies. And seasoned Pokemon fans are keen to the very fact that many of Pokemon's legendaries, from the Golems to the Super Ancient Trio to the Creation Trio and its Trio Master, are all allusions to the symbology and motifs of Abrahamic religions and folklore. So we can see that not only is Lugia's representation of storms and metaphorical value bolstered through biblical allusion, but so too is the significance of Ho's rainbow and Lugia's storm dichotomy. Because what else besides the storm was a very prominent metaphor in the Great Flood? Yep, the rainbow. And now that I think about it, yeah, I'm pretty sure Lugia and Ho were the instruments of the Great Poke Flood used by Pokegod to purge the earth of Poke furries. Hashtag thank you, Pokegod. But base Genesis Trio and biblical allusions aside, the chaotic nature of the mind which Lugia is steeped in is also the very key to connoting Lugia's typing and stormy nature. You might have always thought the water type would have been best for a god of storms, but that's actually narrow thinking, as its flying typing already denotes his command over the sky's element, and water typing would just be superfluous. Now, I also know many people think that the idea of a deep sea dwelling fat-fingered porpoise being psychic type is wholly irreconcilable, which is understandable, but aside from sharing fat-fingered mutant genes with Mewtwo, there's two very eloquent reasons that will have you come away with a predilection for Lugia's psychic typing. And that's that Lugia's psychic typing both succinctly encapsulates its representation of the chaotic inside of the mind, and also serves to further characterize its command over the sky's elements and the violent and chaotic storms such a tempestuous mind would conjure up as metaphorical manifestations of said psyche. This is brilliant metaphorical design here, because adjectives such as stormy and tempestuous are commonly used to describe a chaotic state of mind or affairs, and stem from the fact that storms are a long-time traditional metaphor for an uncertain and chaotic state of mind or affairs. Pretty deep stuff, but I guess that's to be expected of the diving Pokemon, eh? Come on, let me make my puns. My brain is bleeding from spending days reading and writing about little kitty creatures. However, this is a legendary duo, and so we still have the typing of the other duo member to discuss. And don't just dismiss Ho-Oh yet, as the brilliance in this duo is a two-way street. Ho-Oh's fire typing just as brilliantly evinces Ho-Oh as an analog to the Phoenix and the Huma, two fiery birds that symbolize and thus reinforce Ho-Oh's theme of rebirth. It also goes further by evoking that Ho-Oh's fire is not the natural destructive kind like that which burned down the Brass Tower and killed the Beast Trio, but the exact opposite in a phoenix-like divine restorative fire which reincarnated said Beast Trio. In addition, Ho-Oh's typing connotes it to be an analog to the Fangwang and Phoenix and their shared qualities, thus evincing Ho-Oh as an analog to the sun in the sky, its symbolism of consciousness, positivity, and especially its life-giving light and heat that also forms rainbows themselves. Makes sense how Ho-Oh forms with rainbows now, eh boys? So Ho-Oh's fire typing and its encapsulation of the sun, and the aforementioned three closely related mythical births of fire, great virtue, and rebirth, is a great example of show don't tell that is just rich with meaning. See, I told you Ho-Oh would be just as utterly brilliant as Lugia. These guys are like onions, they have layers. Now, as for the flying type they have in common, it denotes and connotes many things simultaneously. First of all, it denotes a command over the sky's elements. Secondly, when coupled with their unique primary typings, it further distinctively characterizes what their control of the sky manifests as, and thus reinforces the aforementioned representations they hold, that of auspicious rainbows and cataclysmic storms. And finally, it connotes a shared nature, interconnection, and interdependence between the two, like that of yin and yang. This is another underlying motif that is common in Pokemon, as you can see it conveyed in countless legendary groups. You have the Bird Trio originating this theme with a shared flying typing, the Eon Duo with their shared dragon and psychic typing, the Creation Trio with a shared dragon typing, Lake Trio with their shared psychic typing, Genie Trio with their shared flying typing, and the Tau Trio with their shared dragon typing. And when this isn't the case, as it is with the Super Ancient Trio, other game elements like abilities are used for connoting an interconnection. Alright, so I'm pretty sure you can now see that me reaching this conclusion wasn't just because of cocaine, and also how this dichotomy is simultaneously both very subtle and very prominent. Genuinely made me take a second look at these Johto legendaries I'd usually think of picking last for my legendary dodgeball dream team, and instantly made them my favorite regional legendaries, bar none. They're subtle in the way they aren't a mindless behemoth or leviathan that are portrayed as epic apocalyptic forces of nature, but very prominent in the involute dichotomy of rainbows and storms, their profound metaphorical connotations, and how the ideal versus the shadow or yin and yang within us shapes our human being, which in turn impacts all of human society and the natural world at large. Alrighty, that marks the end of the first section of the Artopsy, and detailing the general nature of these two towering titans of power and eloquence. Now in the second, the bird trio, you say. I'm just getting to that. But there are two interesting loose ends to tie in this duo's relation to people that both of their metaphorical meanings can explain. A connection that is just as great as the super ancient trio's own connection to the people of Hoenn. And once we tie those two loose ends, I will finally reveal the bird trio's true meaning. So are you ready? Okay, the first tidbit would be the very interesting fact that before Lugia dove into the depths of the ocean, it once had a tower like Ho-Oh. Lugia perched on this tower as Ho-Oh did its own until lightning struck it and burned it down on one fateful day. Now this is such a better story than Lugia having always slumbered in the abyssal trenches of and this is why. The brass tower Lugia once perched on would represent how the side of our mind Lugia represents was one we were once long ago more consciously aware and reverent of, and thus more readily able to harmonize and balance with our ideal Ho-Oh side. As our minds and societies that arise thereout evolved with a knowledge of good and evil, it completely altered the way we perceive ourselves and the world around us, and also altered the world around us in a way that is wholly unlike the rest of the harmonious natural world. Thereof, we would no longer like to think of, nor healthily subsume this unflattering side of our human nature. Contemporaneously, Lugia's nature to generate storms naturally caused this tragedy that befell the tower, similar to how it used lightning to form the Whirl Islands, although not intentionally, as the Pokédex shows us can happen. And this event represents our recognition and witnessing of our chaotic side engendering tragedy and immature inability to bear identifying with and hopefully subsuming it, which allows it to possess us like demons and act at odds with the harmony of nature. Consequently, humanity would feel reluctant to rebuilding a tower for the chaotic quality it once held deep reverence for, due to the fact it reflects the ugliness of man like a crystal clear mirror, and due to humanity's general propensity for not wanting to take any accountability for their negative side and tragedies, since they evoke strong feelings of guilt and insecurity, and also consequences, which are all at odds with our pride and our very ego. Mankind would feel that rebuilding a tower to such unflattering qualities of our nature is not as pleasing as both living in a guilt-free, blissful ignorance of, and maliciously utilizing these qualities that exist in all of us. This would be why the tower was never reconstructed, Lugia left a prominent spot alongside Ho-Oh it once held in our minds, and why Lugia took to the seas, which symbolizes unconsciousness and the unknown. And since it departed the forefront of our minds, all we ever consciously think about and praise is the Ho-Oh side and Bell Tower. But there is a grave and mortal issue with that, and that is the second tidbit, which is in fact that Ho-Oh too had left its perch. Something about embarking on an endless flight through the skies in search of a pure trainer. Well, aside from this connection to purity and people helping further strengthen its representation as the ideal, the main point to take note of is that it was directly after Lugia's tower burned down and Ho-Oh reviving the Beast Trio that Ho-Oh left. Honestly, this is a grim reality kind of point to make, but it needs to be said. These two are an interdependent and interconnected duality, like yin and yang, and so that ideal is gone in general once that balance went out the window. Ho-Oh's journey through the sky is said to be endless because without that balanced harmony and awareness of our true nature, that's just what the quest of finding a pure-hearted person is going to be. Endless. When humanity views everything it does as virtuous and being evil pays off more, we see a lot less accountability for evil and a lot more diluted justification of evil and chaos as good. Everyone claims they are saints, and everyone engages in the delusion of justifying the evils they personally engage in as good to avoid the insecurity, guilt, and consequences from the realization that we are at odds with being the pure ideal we intuitively yearn to embody. So there's no more harmony and balance in our nature, and we truly lost sight of the balance of Ho-Oh and Lugia, for which there exists no more pure men among us, and the true unity of people and Pokemon is lost. Well, that is until you turn on your Game Boy or DS and the protagonist comes along. A protagonist who, unlike all trainers and villains he battles across Johto, is the true embodiment of both purity and unity between people and Pokemon, and thus he is the true harmony and purity Ho-Oh seeks to restore balance and purity once more to the people and Pokemon in Johto, the one for whom Ho-Oh alights. Wait, did you just open your manhole mouth to say you don't believe me about Ho departing after Lugia's departure, which represented times of trouble for the region, and also it returning for the protagonist who embodies the purity needed for a new era, and that I'm full of crap? Boom. Fuck you, I win. Okay, so I know that was an ideal ending there for this section of the video, with how meaningful it was, but before we get to the third and final part, I need to make good on my promise. So remember how a while back I said that the bird trio is just kind of awkwardly existing without a purpose, like your 13-year-old self going through puberty? Well, if their respective trio master is Lugia, the beast that is representative of storms and all their metaphorical connotations, are there 3 specific types of storms which are consistent with the typing characteristics, the very shared chaotic nature, and even the Pokédex's information of the 3 birds? Like maybe, I don't know, winter storms, thunderstorms, and firestorms? With this uncovered meaning, the bird trio accomplishes 3 things. They follow the storm motif their trio master Lugia set, emphasize it further by embodying specific forms of storms, and finally, they roam the vast world on their wings, spreading chaos like chaos angels of a central chaos storm god. That is to say, a chaotic parallel to the cycle of rebirth, the beast trio roams the land spreading. So freaking badass, huh? Makes you finally see the most slept on legendary trio in a new light, I bet. Well, unfortunately, Moltres is the gay duck that craps on the new light of a storm trio with its contrasting Pokédex entries. Or so it would seem. See, this guy is not an explicit metaphor for storms in being one itself, but rather, as further entries of the Pokédex further characterize it to be, Moltres holds an implicit connection as the very deity of spring itself. Now, why would that be in the trio of a storm god? You might be asking me with your stank-ass breath. You might also be saying with your poo breath that storms are ugly, scary, and chaotic, whereas spring is peaceful and lovely, so you're just full of crap. Well, to that I say, I can be both full of crap and right. You see, Moltres is the odd duck of its trio pattern for the same reason Suicune is the odd duck of its own. They still complement their storm and tragedy trio brethren by embodying the purity of spring and water, as these are the necessary components to establishing a cycle that fits their trios perfectly. That's right, I said cycle. Here, to see what I mean, we have to anger every great father of mathematics resting peacefully in their graves by putting 3 between 1 and 2. God, I'm more rebellious than the founding fathers. And in that case, Moltres exists as the very transitional agent between the fall and winter, when the winter storms Articuno embodies occur most frequently, and spring and summer, when the thunderstorm Zapdos embodies occur most frequently. Now Moltres fits the archetype of a spring deity like Persephone from Greek myth, and embodies the very heat and energy of the changing seasons that transitions the seasonal cycle and their storms. The best evidence for establishing this role would be if Giratina kidnapped Moltres from Landorus. But seeing as that sadly isn't in the lore, we'll have to settle for its Pokédex entries, which specifically detail how it brings an end to the winter seasons with its appearance and ushers in spring. This tells us that Moltres is the very first bright light of spring breaking over the horizon. It brings an end to the cold and dark winter storm seasons of Articuno. Thereafter, the initial heat of Moltres transitions to the spring and summer storm seasons of Zapdos, as you couldn't have the gnarly tropical thunderstorms of the warmer seasons without the planet heating up. Finally, as the heat of Moltres is lost over time, Articuno and the winter storms of the colder seasons make their entrance once more. So Moltres is also like a more eloquent Landorus, in a way as the mediator of the Stormy Trio's roles is implicit and not a dick measuring contest. I'd still smash the Genie Trio over the Bird Trio any day though. Have you seen these Giga Chad gods for the bench press? However, even if Moltres is a pretty bird that embodies the prettiest season, don't go thinking Moltres is some nice guy beta loser that'll be asking you how your day is like Suicune. See, Moltres is more of a chaotic neutral spring deity. This is because even though it does embody a pure natural phenomena like Suicune, it does so for the express purposes of enabling its chaotic storm cycle trio rather than dousing the trio's cycle with virtuous intentions. So all in all, you can see that the legendary bird trio is actually an eloquent cycle of storms that still follows Lugia's set storm motif, emphasizes said theme of their trio master as a cycle of such, and roam the lands carrying out Lugia's chaotic nature. But let's not overlook the fact this also tells us that Game Freak can't count for shit. Now, even though that was a pretty big surprise, the birds aren't even the biggest mind blow of this video. You're now probably wondering how there's still more surprises left in this Artopsy, and if you'll even find the Time Lord Doctor somewhere in it. Well, as I said earlier, this is truly the duo of more than meets the eye. See, the 3 birds were actually a mere fake out I hinted at the beginning of this Artopsy to hold your attention for this very moment, where I shall reveal the biggest mind blow of the entire 21st century. I actually know the one true reason why Lugia is chaos itself, other than it being a storm leviathan, and it has a little something to do with its design. There, see that? Lugia's fingers are way too fat to fit in any and all fried chicken buckets. The horror, the absolute horror. I couldn't possibly stand to accept the natural order of a world that did that to me. Could you? Game Freak had achieved peak character design all along, and aside Gatsu. Your troubles are petty high school drama in comparison to what Lugia has to go through daily. And when you think about it, that also gives us the canon reasons as to why Mewtwo is so angsty and destructive as well. He was rocking the fat fingers for 3 years before Lugia came to be after all. So listen, the next time you see Lugia or Mewtwo all bummed out on a park bench late at night, and you just happen to have a fried chicken bucket in hand, just pass them a drumstick. You might just be the one to help them find peace at last. Jokes aside though, I honestly hope I could help you guys find a new appreciation for these slept on legends now that we've gotten past 2/3 of the Artopsy focus on dissecting them. But that's not where this Artopsy ends as a whole though, as the most important part of every single story is its connection to you. Thus, the third and final section of my Artopsies are something I dedicate to connecting the meaning behind storytelling's elements back to us. And so, I don't know who needs to hear this, but listen closely. Never lose sight of the rainbow at the end of every storm. You may have stormy and chaotic days which appear to be endless and fill you with nothing but absolute anxiety and hopelessness, but all storms come to pass. That is a universal rule of which there are no exceptions. Don't make permanent decisions based on temporary feelings, and fight like hell to get to your rainbow at the end of every storm. For me personally, finding my creative voice in this series, fortifying familial bonds, and finding job prospects during my own hellishly unrelenting personal storms represents that promising rainbow for me. But I also wouldn't have reached this rainbow had I not braved the storm and been strengthened immensely by doing so. So I'm thankful of both and appreciate life for both its tragedies and its blessings. In much the same way, I also appreciate both my own flawed shadow and my own virtuous ideal, both of which I continue laboring to harmonize together so as to create many rainbow days for myself and others. So there we have it. A beautiful and timeless metaphorical dichotomy of rainbows and storms by which we can all be saved and bettered. And that's why I love this legendary duo more than any other. And that's pretty much it for this Artopsy. Any other Pokemon or fictional characters you want an Artopsy on, leave it in the comments below as I'm here to deliver. I have many other Pokemon aside from these two that I want to cover, which includes Lugia's fat-fingered brother from another mother. So look forward to the regular uploads on my part. Also, I will be streaming Pokemon on my Glitchhead channel along with other things very soon, so subscribe there as well and come hang out. But all that aside, thank you all for joining me on this very first Artopsy, and until the next Artopsy, I've been Glitchhead. Say thank you to Rayquaza every once in a while, and we are now returning you to your regularly scheduled programming.